versa. So we need to approve the June meeting minutes. Have you all had a chance to review the minutes?
I did not. Did I receive the minutes and not know that?
I believe that Mary Ann sent them out.
They were just called notes.
They were just called notes.
But I don't.
Okay. I believe it was last week. Anybody else see
I
them?
must not be on the distribution because I haven't gotten any emails.
We will confirm, Maritza, that you are on the email distribution list. I apologize for that. But yeah, so they were, thank you for the clarification, they were called notes, not minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the notes?
I move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the June meeting notes. Do all those approve say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. At this time, we're going to open the public comment period. Anybody online or in person is welcome to offer public comment at this time. So we'll go ahead and open the floor to those that are here in person. If you would like to offer any comment, please step forward and state your name.
Hello, do I just talk like this?
Sure.
Okay. Hello, I'm Brock. Do I have a time limit or anything?
3 minutes, and if you could say your first and last name, please.
Okay, pretty standard stuff. Brock Hall, I live a few blocks from here, and I thought it'd be worth using Manchester as an example of how disappointed I am and what a missed opportunity was. And it makes me sad to walk out of my house, and it makes me really bummed. So in 2011, it used to be mostly empty lots, and there's this big willow tree in front of my building. Everyone liked it. There's also Cat Lady's house, and she had more friends over than I did, so I felt sad about myself. And that's all gone now because it's all townhomes and low-rises, which is frustrating for me because instead of lots of little buildings everywhere, you could have fewer, bigger buildings instead, and then all that land could be undeveloped. And under the way the zoning code works, fundamentally, that's not really possible, right? That's a city planning thing. American cities don't really do city planning. And but even under the current zoning code, that would be illegal due to height restrictions and other things like that. So I guess the overall point I have is we sort of sacrifice things like walkability, accessibility, green space, community space, so many other things all in the name of a zoning code that exists for reasons that no one really knows. Because you could have a vet clinic, for example, but not a doctor's office. Why? Nobody knows. I don't know. Does anyone here know? Probably not. And so I just wanted to, I guess, impress upon people the importance of moving away from a zoning code and moving towards city planning where you can do things like I'm talking about, where you can leave land undeveloped but still make a lot of housing and have all these other benefits and make things legal that are good things. So that's me. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Do we have anybody else in the room from the public that would like to offer comment at this time? We'll move to folks participating online. Anybody online like to offer comment? Mr. Wilson? Okay, Mr. Wilson?
Hey, am I heard?
Yes. Can you please state your first and last name, please?
Yes, ma'am. Will Wilson, 2nd District.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Will Wilson, and I am one of 5 local leads at the nonprofit housing advocacy group, RVA YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. Our focus is on providing public comments like this one, often in support of specific housing projects. However, given the forum here today, I'd like to take the opportunity to address this issue more frontally. So thank you for volunteering your time and effort. Your contribution is critical to developing land use guidelines that foster a more open, dynamic, and equitable Richmond. The year 2026, likely when this code will be adopted according to the current timeline, marks 100 years exactly since the Supreme Court decision in Euclid v. Amber, 1926, which overturned a district court decision and in doing so validated the new power of the zoning code. In the majority opinion, Justice George Suderlin infamously referred to apartment houses as, quote, mere parasites, end quote. Within 4 years, this new police power had been unleashed in our cities and towns. 35 of the then 48 states had adopted some form of zoning enabling legislation. The settlement patterns and affordability crisis we have today were set in motion by these malformed government incentives. The district court's decision or the lower court decision should have stood. Judge David Westinghouse correctly recognized zoning as a constitutional taking and saw through the scheme. He said, quote, "The plain truth is that the true object of the zoning ordinance is to place all property in a straitjacket, to regulate the mode of living of persons who hereinafter inhabit it. The result to be accomplished is to classify the population and segregate them according to their income or situation in life." End quote. Make no mistake, zoning has always been about control and conformity. It is not simply a good institution gone bad. Its deep legacy of exclusion contrasts sharply with the pluralistic, cosmopolitan society we otherwise enjoy today. We ask that in your role, tamper and push back against the worst impulses from wherever they might come. Jane Jacobs, in her seminal work, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, in referring to the endless designs that those with government power over land use often have, says, quote, "There is a quality even meaner than outright ugliness or disorder. And this meaner quality is the dishonest mask of pretended order, achieved by ignoring or suppressing the real order that is struggling to exist and struggling to be served," end quote. This pretended order with a heavy hand has scarred our cityscape with urban renewal, eminent domain, and yes, the zoning code. The real order is bottom up. It is the accumulation of voluntary decisions made by citizens, businesses, developers, nonprofits, activists about what is best for their venture, what is best for their families, and what is best for their land. So we need a zoning code that acknowledges and rectifies the historical injustices of exclusion and segregation. We need a code that embraces diversity of housing topologies and allows for a variety of uses, both incremental and innovative. But most of all, as we look to the future and prepare for a world shaped by accelerating technological capabilities and abundant human choice, we need a zoning code rooted in humility above all, which is to mean light touch, open, and yielding to the spontaneous emergent order of a liberal society. Such a city may have a patchwork messiness about it, but it would be vibrant, it would be human scale, and most importantly, it would be just. Thank you. We meet every third Wednesday at Triple Crossing Brewery on Fushi Street, and you can follow us at rvamd.org.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Do we have any others online that would like to offer comment at this time? This time, I don't see anybody else raising their hand or jumping up to offer comment, so I'm gonna close the public comment period at this time and move us to the next item on our agenda, which is our consultant presentations. I believe we're gonna have a presentation from Renee and Emily.
Thank you very much. Just give me a second and I'll share my screen. All right, my name is Renee Bieberstein. I introduced myself during the last meeting. I'm from Code Studio, part of the consulting team. I'm going to give a very brief version of a presentation that we previously gave called the Zoning 101 webinar. This is really just a little bit about the history of zoning and about what we think makes good practice in zoning. Previously, I apologize for those who attended and saw it before. It's going to repeat, but it's going to be a lot shorter this time, so this is a bit of an abridged version. I think it's going to just help inform the discussion that we have later on. And then after that, I have another short presentation to make on behalf of UTL, who are part of our consulting team. They're an architecture or design firm from Boston, and they're leading the charge on the pattern book, which is a component of the project. But there was a request to present a little bit about what the pattern book is in a little bit more detail, what its purposes are in this context, and what it's achieved so far. So I'm going to give you a little preview of the pattern book after this.
Renee, I apologize for interrupting you.
Yeah.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. Where's the mic for the?
I'm assuming it's in the
Oh,
middle.
okay, so yeah, let me know if you can't hear me. Please shout out again. Sorry, I speak quietly sometimes. So beginning with the Zoning 101 webinar. So very quickly here, again, it's an abridged version of the presentation. Questions I'm gonna try and just go over quickly. What is zoning? For those who don't know, where did zoning come from? And how can we do zoning better going forward? And obviously this could be talked about in much more detail, but quick overview here. What is zoning? Zoning always goes with a plan, or always should go with a plan. Its intent is really to be part of what implements a planned vision. So in this case, you've got a plan recently produced through a long public consultation process called Richmond 300. Richmond 300 created the original vision for Richmond that we're now effectively working to implement in the zoning code. And looking back at the big picture, theoretically, there's essentially two different ways you can implement a plan. One of them is through direct public investments. The plan says build a park here, the plan says build a BRT. Okay, then the city goes and does it. The other way is to use zoning or other ordinances to allow the plan to be implemented incrementally through individual developments or other changes. So we're sort of directing the flow of development in the future to help implement the plan. But it's just one of multiple tools. Richmond 300, we could say a lot about it, but very broadly, it's 5 topic visions. We're high quality places, equitable transportation, diverse economy, inclusive housing, and thriving environment. There's a lot of specific goals and tasks under each one of those. So just to continue on to the land use component of Richmond 300. So Richmond 300 had a land use map in it, which is up on a panel behind me. You can take a look at it later on. And it identifies a series of different land use categories that it maps across the city, and it defines each one in terms of what types of things could happen there, something about the scale of the built form, how tall it might be, how the buildings address the street, a number of other features around each one of these categories. So looking here, we're seeing the corridor mixed use category, just as an example. And each one of these categories is going to get refined through zoning, and it will likely become multiple zones. So, when it gives a particular maximum height, the zones we create may create different heights within that. Again, if refine it a bit more. So common metrics that you see within zoning, to give you some examples here, it doesn't have to be necessarily this, but common things you might see. These are just some examples that are drawn from a recent code we worked on for the city of Cleveland. Dimensions, required landscape area, maximum fence heights, public realm, minimum space around buildings and property lines, also known as setbacks, how you do transition between different zones. So if you've got houses back in a neighborhood, you've got bigger buildings on a main street, how the two of them relate to each other. And finally, where parking is located. In terms of built form, maximum height and width of buildings, height and elevation of the ground story here. Windows, so maximum amount of blank wall area and the minimum amount of windows, as well as controls for commercial signage where that happens, maximum space between doors, and also a use mix. So this is, for each one of these zones you're seeing across the top here, there is a permitted mix of uses that can happen there. And sometimes those uses are committed or permitted as a right, and sometimes they're conditional based on some other requirement. And each one of these calls out to an additional set of standards. So that's just sort of a bit of a brief kind of overview of some of the things you might see covered in a zoning code. And each one of those things is packaged up and put into a zone, which gets applied to a map. So looking at a map in this case, this is the existing zoning map for Richmond. You would look up R3 or R5 or R1, and you'd be able to go to the code and see what's permitted there. And ideally, it should be clear to understand. Where did zoning come from? Again, there's a whole lot of history here that I can't go into in too much detail, but just broadly in terms of where the zoning's origins, both zoning codes and building codes kind of emerged together as a reaction against unplanned growth and poor urban conditions in the 19th century. So building codes over time have related more to safety, whereas zoning codes relate more to quality of life. And that includes regulation of things like lots, built form, and also separation of incompatible uses. So the classic thing is separation of noxious industrial uses from residential neighborhoods. But zoning has a very, I think as was alluded to in the comments before, zoning has a very mixed legacy, not necessarily all good. And I think we should acknowledge that when we have this discussion. So going back to the early 20th century, first zoning code in Los Angeles, 1904, 1926, it becomes permitted by the Supreme Court in the Euclid v. Ambler case, which is about separation of industrial and residential uses. In the 1930s, Richmond had produced its first zoning code a little after Euclid v. Ambler, first real zoning code. In the 1930s, they hire Harlan Bartholomew, well-known planner, unfortunately well-known for his segregationist views, to engage in a planning and zoning process for the city. He prepares the 1942 code, the 1946 plan, and he remains involved to some extent through the 1960s, I believe. One of the products of his period of work, which happened in a lot of other places in the country, not only Richmond, was the introduction of single-family zoning, said by some to be a kind of a backwards or kind of a roundabout way to do segregation, at least income segregation in cities, by saying that there's only certain parts of the city where certain parts of the city are limited to single-family homes, which obviously have a certain cost associated with them. I think that minimum lot sizes and minimum lot widths go with that as well. So in some ways, it drives up the cost and contributes to segregation of cities. He also did things like putting industrial uses closer to African American neighborhoods in the city, which has a much longer legacy of environmental racism and so forth associated with it. Going forwards after that, there was several kind of subsequent rewrites of the code that happened. In 1976, the current ordinance was created. That was a comprehensive new code, but it still retains some of the single-family zoning legacy of the 1942 ordinance, even though at this point demographics have changed and there's majority African American neighborhoods that also have single-family zoning at this point. The mapping was updated in 1979, and it's kind of incrementally been updated since then. From 1976 to the present, Richmond's been updating its code in various ways. They did things recently like removing parking minimums, permitting ADUs, regulating short-term rentals, and adding a number of different zones. And from that point to 2019, Richmond 300 comes in place. It's a new plan that emphasizes inclusivity. It requires a new zoning ordinance for its implementation, which is why we're all here today. So from the present through to 2026, we're going to be involved in working on to put together this new zoning ordinance and trying to figure out how we can make a better ordinance that builds a better city going forward and implements the goals of Richmond 300. And just very briefly, in terms of, again, this is from our perspective as consultants, how can we do better consulting? How can we do better zoning going forward? I think it's important, there could be additional goals beyond this, but to state a few kind of high priority things: understanding the existing context, regulating only what matters, not things that don't matter, being clear and predictable, and prioritizing equity in the code. So understanding the existing context, things like blocks and streets, lots, buildings, site elements, and use. Classic mistake that cities make, including Richmond, has been looking at a kind of historic area that developed pre-zoning and then crudely applying a kind of more suburban style zoning on top of that neighborhood, so that when we want to replace a building or add a new building in, even though it may resemble its neighbors, it can't be built legally because those traditional historic buildings can't be built anymore. You have to have a lot of parking and big setbacks and all these sort of suburban style things. And so it creates a bit of a mishmash when you try and put those two things together. It doesn't work. So bringing the zoning into alignment with its context is a critical thing to do. Regulating only what matters. Defining the context and creating zoning tools that respond to that, trying to avoid regulating things that don't matter, that just add more red tape and slow down the process. We want to sort of really kind of zero in on things that people really care about, where there's a real risk of something going wrong, where there's a real desire to try and push things in a certain direction. Building in flexibility as well too, so we always want to try and express rules in terms of ranges. So setbacks are in terms of minimums and maximums. Heights, there's a range as well, all these sorts of things. It's not about saying something that's so strict that you have to get an amendment or get some sort of special permission every time you want to build it. It's more about a range of what's acceptable, so that we can it can operate in a way that's smooth. Being clear and predictable as well. So we try and produce codes that are really graphic in nature. These are some examples again from Cleveland. We use photos, we use diagrams, we use very simple metrics that are easy to understand. Ideally, you shouldn't have to be a lawyer or some sort of a specialist to understand the zoning code. It should be in the same way that Richmond 300 is accessible. It should be something that any member of the public can open up and work to understand. And it should be your by right process in terms of how you get things approved. We want to try and allow as many desirable things as of right as possible and avoid having to go through special processes to achieve them. And then finally, prioritizing equity. There's a lot of discussion around around affordability, what sort of effect zoning has on it. Zoning can improve affordability, we believe, by opening up more options for housing. However, we have to understand there's also state laws that limit what we can do. So we have to work within those laws, or at least we as consultants have to kind of work within what's there. So obviously, city council and politicians and others can try and push that forward. But for example, Richmond's can't require a minimum percentage as of right market-built development to be affordable at the moment because of the limitations that are placed on the city by state law. So just quickly, key takeaways here. Zoning always implements a plan by applying regulations to development, or at least it always should be implementing a plan. It usually includes a set of standard elements that regulate built form and land use. Those get packaged up into zones and put onto a map. Zoning is a really powerful tool that can help neighborhoods and cities in a variety of ways. However, it's been historically misused at times, and it risks causing harm. So eventually, an example of that is still its historic historic perpetuation of inequality in some cities, in some parts of cities, which we're still living with today. And finally, the best practices that we recommend in terms of zoning are understanding the existing context really well, regulating only what matters, being clear and predictable, and prioritizing equity. So I'm going to wrap this up right now. We're going to have a chance to discuss this later in the context of all the panels you see around this. I'm just going to move directly on to UTL's presentation. So this is a presentation that's put together for us by UTL, so apologize if it's not made by me. So if I stumble a bit. This is a bit of a summary of UTL's pattern book work. And I think it was put together because pattern books have a lot of different definitions and can mean different things to different people. Sometimes they're used as a way to preserve historic neighborhoods. Sometimes they're used as a way to regulate historic style developments in a new development. But the goal of this particular pattern book and this project is essentially to, number one, identify patterns that will give us information about metrics that need to be regulated and which will inform the zoning reform process. So we're going to be looking at historic neighborhoods around Richmond and identifying the metrics of built form that exist there, the metrics of block form and architecture, and try to use those numbers to help inform the zoning that we do later on. So remember when I talked about the mismatches before between historic patterns and suburban style or kind of crudely designed codes, we're going to try and get those two in much better alignment to each other. Communicating to the public why zoning changes might be necessary to align the regulations with desirable existing built form patterns. So when we make the updates later on, when we recommend updates to zoning, we're going to be sort of saying, okay, we're recommending changing the zoning this way because we've done this analysis that says this is the historic pattern. And so again, allowing those sort of historic style buildings that are much denser to be built in some historic neighborhoods, rather than trying to force them to go through an elaborate process to build something that's essentially already part of the context there. Identifying areas with nonconformities. So those are areas where with existing buildings that would not be legal to be built under current zoning regulations. So exactly the situation that I've been talking about, but figure out where it's located. And identifying areas where there's unbuilt zoning capacity. So that's the flip side. Areas where zoning allows more than what's built there. And so is that a situation that's okay? Might be in some situations. In other cases, it might be a problem if it's going to allow monster-sized buildings that don't meet its context and that we might not want for some reason. So looking at the sort of the analysis that UTL is doing, it's like I call a multi-scalar analysis that operates on 4 different scales: the city scale, the neighborhood scale, the block scale, and the building scale. I'll go through all this on the screen right now. The city scale analysis, so this is looking at the entire city, of course, mapping contextual patterns, historic neighborhoods, urban fabric, existing land use, and growth potential, and identifying misalignments between those two, as I was just saying. So, and what's the, how do we test for the misalignments? Looking at things, for example, like lot sizes. So for example, looking at lot size minimums in the zoning for single family and two family zones, and identifying places where existing lot patterns are smaller than that. So basically existing lots are below the minimum standard that the code requires. Same thing with heights, existing height places where existing heights exceed the maximum height, and the flip side of that, where there's unbuilt building height, as I said. So let's look on a map and see where this happens. So special use permits, this is a process that Richmond has where essentially you're allowed to kind of get out of the requirements of existing zoning if you go through a process of approval to achieve a special use permit, either for use or built form. We map them out in terms of where in the city they're located. There's certain hotspots where you get a whole lot of them. And this is, although there's a variety of reasons for special use permits, the sort of the large number of them, the big thrust, which we hope is going to be sort of resolved through this process, are situations where you're essentially building in a historic neighborhood where the zoning is not in alignment with the historic pattern. So this is kind of exactly where UTL is going with this project. Lot size nonconformities. So examples here, these are lots where the existing lot is smaller than the minimum lot standard. So again, you can sort of see there's an alignment, there's a situation here where there, again, in certain historic neighborhoods, you get a whole lot of these. And again, that's a problem. We should be aligning the zoning as closely as possible with the existing patterns in those areas, rather than forcing people to get a special permission to develop a lot.
For your special use permit map, what was the time period for those?
I believe, if you teal, I think this is the entire history of special use permits since 1976.
You go back to 63.
Was that
63?
I think I may have. I think they may be only mapping since 1976, since the current code went into place. I would have to check with them and see. So lot size nonconformities, building height nonconformities. So not as many of these. These are situations where existing buildings are taller than the maximum height that's permitted. There's a few areas where that happens. And then the flip side is where there's a lot of kind of unused height potential. So the existing zoning gives you a lot more permissions than people are taking. And this might be okay in some places where it's just an area that's kind of underdeveloped and we want to encourage a lot more development to happen later on, particularly in areas that are historically not that residential. I don't know if there's like some industrial or commercial areas where we want to kind of have more larger mixed use buildings maybe happening in the future. We need to kind of understand a little bit more about why these are happening. But there's also a few other areas. There's obviously some residential areas as well where this is happening, at least in the lighter blue and smaller numbers. And so what UTL is going to be doing is picking certain representative neighborhoods to then zoom into and do a more detailed analysis on. And this is kind of their first pass at identifying these neighborhoods based on the criteria that I've just shown you. They're going to be looking at 10 different neighborhoods. And so part of the question to you guys today, and feel free to weigh in later on, is which neighborhoods they should be zooming into in more detail. The 10 that are here are sort of the top 10, again, based on that analysis. The ones in blue here, those are the top 10 are in dark outlines, thicker outlines on the map. The ones in thinner outlines and listed in blue are kind of the runners up. So if there's a feeling that we should switch some of these around or try something else, I think they're open to picking different ones for whatever reasons. If there's something else that's more representative of a particular thing.
And these are neighborhoods where current built environment doesn't match the zoning.
That's correct, yeah.
How about, and maybe you'll do this separately, but like parts of the city where the zoning doesn't match the community's vision for the future?
Sure, I mean, that's more of a question for us, for
For you
Coach
guys?
Studio.
Okay.
So the pattern book is just a small piece of this bigger
Okay.
project. The pattern book is really just a kind of analysis of historic patterns. In terms of other areas that are maybe less historic, or it could be a historic area that we want it to change because of the vision of Richmond 300, let's say, that's more of a question for us. So what UTL is doing is basically doing a sort of just a physical analysis of the existing situation. And they're going to produce the pattern book, which will be kind of a reference document for us to look at going forward. We don't necessarily have to follow it, but it'll just be a reference that we can take a look at. So just kind of going beyond the city scale, I'm just going to quickly jump to the other scales here, the neighborhood, the block, and the building. These are just some examples here from previous work that UTL worked on in Atlanta that Coast Video participated in as well. So the neighborhood scale, you'll see things like this where they look at, they zoom into one of those neighborhoods. They talk about what percentage of properties conform and what don't conform and why they don't conform. So whether it's use or form or both. And then we kind of zoom even further into the block scale. Now we're kind of looking at much more detail in terms of how the block is arranged. They can actually measure all kinds of things that we don't have data for at the whole city scale. So side setbacks and all that sort of stuff, we can measure of those things and figure out where it's aligned and where it's not aligned, and really try to kind of record that special character. And then we're actually zooming into the individual building scale. So looking at typical buildings in different neighborhoods, all those things that make that neighborhood special, particularly historic neighborhoods. So that's just a bit of an overview of the pattern book.
Is that, a lot of those graphics that you presented going to be somewhere we can study them?
Yeah, these are taken from the pattern book that they worked on. These ones here are just examples from Atlanta. So
Before that, when you were doing the,
back to here, sorry, these ones?
the city things like that.
Yeah, so when we get to the next round of public, so when UTL presents their work for the first time, this is a bit of just like a preview. When they present it for the first time, which will be in August, you'll be able to see all this and more.
But the presentation will probably be on the website after this.
Yeah, you can continue to look at this for now, but there'll be additional maps and more information.
So I know that we're going to have a facilitated conversation where we can talk about this a little more detailed, but before we move over to Emily with Brick and Story for the Community Ambassador Program presentation, are there any other questions that we want to ask Renee that can't wait until the facilitated discussion? Just dying to ask them now. Okay. We're not taking public comment at this time. Thank you. Emily, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. I think I just need permission to share. There we go. With that. Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Hi, my name is Emily McKnight. I'm with Brick and Story, which is an urban planning firm that specializes in community engagement, and I'm supporting this engagement effort. I'm here today to talk to you about a program that's about to be launching called the Community Ambassador Program. I'm going to walk through some basics. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask me, or you can pull me aside after this presentation. This is going to be a pretty general overview. We'll be launching this information on the city's website at the end of the week, and you'll find more detailed information there. I'm going to scroll. So as Renee said, there are 5 phases of engagement for this project. We are currently in the middle section here, phases 2 to 4, pattern book, framework for new zoning ordinance, and the framework for the new zoning districts. Come November, we're going to sit down and reconvene and figure out what engagement needs look like going forward, because we know that we'll have more information about what it is that we need to hear from folks. The Richmond Zoning Code refresh is an extension of Richmond 300. Richmond 300 was an exemplary engagement effort and planning process. We know that. We also know that certain groups were not sufficiently reached. There were underrepresented groups in the feedback that we received. So for this zoning outreach, we're making a very concerted effort to reach those groups who were underrepresented in the feedback that we received for Richmond 300. The groups are here listed on our screen: 8th and 9th District residents, African American residents, Hispanic Latinx residents, other communities of color, young people, and low-income residents. One of our tools for doing that is the Community Ambassador Program. This plays on the idea that the best people to reach communities are people from the communities themselves. So this is a hyper-local engagement strategy in which we ask folks from a specific neighborhood to reach out to folks in that neighborhood to engage in this process. Engagement will look different at different steps of the code refresh. So we might be asking for very specific public input. We may also just be asking for feedback on the engagement itself. It will depend where we are in the process. But there are a couple of core elements here. These are paid opportunities. So we will be giving folks money for their time. We want to respect the time that they're giving us. And it will be an opportunity for folks to support us at our engagements. So these are engagements that Brick and Story is already running. So these would be workshops, open houses, pop-ups, where we might need extra hands. For that, we're going to be asking residents to raise their hand and tell us if they'd like to be involved. We will be advertising those opportunities online. I'll get into some of the details in just a minute. These will be short-term opportunities. So it will be for one specific pop-up, one specific open house or workshop. And there will be lots of different types of engagements that are available. Some of those include, like I said, supporting at tabling events across the neighborhoods, flyering, going door to door, phone call outreach, open house or workshop support, and then hyper local support that might look like going to local grocery stores or bus stops. Here we get into a couple of the details. So as I said, these opportunities are going to be listed online. They will be online by the end of the week. You're hearing it for the first time. And they will be circulated through our community partners. Online, folks can raise their hand. Opportunities will come up on the website via Eventbrite for folks to say, hi, I'm interested in volunteering at the workshop on Friday. And from there, we will start scheduling folks. When they arrive, we're going to give them a sign-in form so we know who came. We'll give them a brief on-the-ground training. Depending on the event, that might look like something online, but no longer than 15 minutes. And then we will be offering folks $20 for any specific, $20 an hour for individual events, including training or attendance at meetings. That will be paid using a gift card. If you have any more information, want any more information about this project, you can go ahead and go on the website, but like I said, it's not online yet. It will be online by the end of the week. Any questions?
Yeah, do any council members have any questions for Emily? Renee, did I see you raise your hand? I know you're not a council, okay, I thought I saw you. Go ahead.
I have a couple. So with Richmond 300, there was a concerted outreach to those exact groups, and a community ambassador model was also utilized. And then you said the feedback is that people weren't reached. So I just, something to consider is like how that will result in a different outcome with this process, and then how you will do outreach to recruit the community ambassadors, making sure that you're recruiting people who are in those targeted groups, I would assume, because I could see a lot of people who aren't in those targeted groups raise their hand to want to be ambassadors, but that might not really help reach the audience. So just love to hear your.
Sure. So a couple of things. So in Richmond 300, it was a small team of community ambassadors that looked like, I think it was 5 to 7 folks, and they were paid as contractors for the city. So it was just those 5 to 7 folks throughout the entire process. We got feedback that was useful, but it was also such a small group, other people wanted to participate. So here we're flipping that on its head a bit and instead just advertising one-off opportunities, hoping to engage more folks, hoping to engage hyper-local folks. So instead of somebody who can just participate for a full year, maybe you can only participate this Saturday at your neighborhood grocery store, great. So we're trying to make the barrier to entry smaller. There were other parts to your question, and that's the one.
How are you going to recruit people?
Sure. So we're really going to be relying on community partners there. We've started to create a long list. You all helped us at our last meeting. We'll be advertising it through traditional methods like the city, but that's how we advertised it last time, to your point, and we didn't reach as many people as we needed to. What we're going to be doing this time instead is really leaning on those local partners. That looks like local churches, community centers, et cetera.
I mean, the community ambassadors did result in more participation from those targeted groups with Richmond 300. And I think Kendra brought it up at the last meeting, that the list of the community partners that we generated at our last meeting is very similar to lists that have been created in the past. And so like, I mean, and with a project, with something that's even more complicated than the master plan, like the zoning ordinance is like even more complicated. So just trying to, I don't know, I don't have the answer. And if I did, I would be really rich. But I don't know, just maybe it's for us as well to consider, is how you, not just the same groups.
For what it's worth, we spent the majority of the day thinking about that same question. So driving around town, just trying to visit different communities, different hubs, and we're parsing it through ourselves. If anybody has any, lightning bolts, let us know. Yeah.
Ask how many people attended the webinar.
The webinar that I want to say 84 people at the first one. And
First one was better attended.
Yeah, 84
The
people.
second one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think an inherent issue is that people don't fully understand how zoning impacts them and all of the different issues in their lives. And so I think communicating that piece is the really important piece in engagement and in trying to recruit ambassadors. So
Yeah.
or just keep that in mind.
Yeah, so something we have, it's not anywhere now because we're still figuring out dates and locations, but some of our first outreach is going to be pop-up events, which is what we call just going somewhere where we know people are, where people are already there. And we are specifically doing pop-ups targeting the groups that we identified as underrepresented in Richmond 300. Hoping to, like you said, we're just trying to communicate that this process is happening. Ways to be involved, resources, et cetera. It's a very complicated topic. It's an important topic. Yeah.
Will there be some type of priority for those in more than one of the targeted groups? So say, for instance, you're in the 8th district, African American, and you're low income, versus someone who's just in the 8th district.
Yeah, it's a good
Is there
question.
some type of way you're going to decide who would get the opportunity to be a community volunteer?
It's a good question. Right now, I can tell you what we're thinking, and again, nothing is online yet, so it's still in process. We're thinking of using Eventbrite because we've seen it work before. The way that Eventbrite works is that there's a certain number of slots, right? So in some ways, it's first come, first served, so we would want to make sure that if there's an event in a certain neighborhood, it's being advertised to those neighborhood residents, not everywhere else in the city, right? What we've talked about is having a couple of extra slots available for any specific engagement and then prioritizing folks as best we can. It's another conversation we were having all day today, trying to figure out how to answer that. If you have any thoughts, please let us know. We're very much in the thick of it.
Does it depend on how many people
Yeah,
apply?
yeah.
You know,
I guess if that was a question I had, do you have a target number of how many ambassadors you're looking for so that it's more effective this time around?
So this one, it's hard to give a number because it's so specific to an event. So for a workshop where we're expecting 200 people, it's going to be more volunteers that we'll need than maybe we're doing a tabling event outside of a bus stop. That's going to be 1 or 2 folks. So super dependent. Yeah.
Are you interested in like high school students?
Yes, we were actually you saw young people listed. It was difficult for us to reach them in Richmond 300. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think,
Yeah.
I haven't been in high school in a while, that you have to have volunteer hours to graduate. So I don't think you could pay them, but I think that that's also something to tap in like into the school systems and just see, because the schools are in the neighborhoods, and so the students are also in the neighborhoods as well. So I don't know.
It's a great suggestion.
they're the future, you know, we need to get them involved, right?
Yeah.
It's important for them to be involved as well.
We were talking about today very low, beginning level. We were talking about engaging civics classes and seeing, especially down the road where we have more specific questions for folks to engage with, working with the teachers to come up with some sort of a lesson plan so we can deeply engage those folks. But I love the idea of volunteer hours. It's a good one.
So great conversation, but I want to keep us on agenda. And at this time, Emily, I think you're going to introduce us to the facilitated discussion for the advisory council. And Just to note, this is a participation opportunity for just the advisory council. This isn't point again where we're going to take public comment. That public comment opportunity has closed. So with that, Emily, you want to move us to this next item of the agenda?
I would love to do that. So around the room, you're going to see a few boards. Those boards represent different chapters of Richmond 300. They include looking around equitable transportation, high quality places, diverse economy, thriving environment, and inclusive housing. What we'd like to do is what we call a gallery walk. We're going to have you walk around the room and just drop your initial thoughts. You can see we've given you a bit of structure. What questions, suggestions, or concerns do you have about each of these topics? You're going to see the vision listed there as well. That's the vision that came out of Richmond 300. This is useful for us as we start to actually implement the ideas that came out of Richmond 300 to understand what are people's initial reactions. From there, we're going to have a small group activity related to each one of these topics. But this first activity, I'm going to ask you to use sticky notes. You'll see sticky notes around the table. We're going to give ourselves about 5-6 minutes. So this is not a very long activity. This is really just getting our feet wet. So we're going to walk around. You'll use your sticky notes. If you have a pen, great. If you need a pen, we have them for you. And when you're finished, you can go around and look at what people have said. So once you've left your own comments, you can see what others said. When you're finished, you can come back to your seat, and that's how I know that you're done.
Is this supposed to be related to zoning, or?
This is related specifically to just the vision statement you see on the board.
Oh, to the statement.
Just the vision
And
statement.
anything that you have to know by reading the plan, if you've looked at it, and how it might relate to zoning, I think.
I think we're talking about zoning, but if you're on the fence and you're not sure if it relates to zoning, go ahead and write it down.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, ultimately, we're going to have a discussion about how to implement the plan through zoning.
Through zoning, okay.
Here on the exercises, we said, what, 5 to 8 minutes?
Yeah, I'm going to give us, let's call it 6 minutes.
6
And
minutes?
see where we are in 6 minutes. Yeah. Thank you, appreciate it.
Hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. Doing all right?
I'm fine.
I don't know. Yeah.
We put on Zoom every time. Now I don't have to.
Okay, well.
Yeah.
And now it's off.
Doesn't sound like it's a great second round.
It looks like avocado.
All sorts of things.
Yeah.
This is the easy.
Yeah.
That was right, that was perfect.
Hi. Good, how are you? You heard of this?
Where's my at?
We were double booked, so today is the UI. Yes, so we're doing the presentation at 3:30. So like we booked that before we had this.
I'm so happy that it's happening.
Oh, you got your redesign.
Sounds like potential commercial process. That's coming.
Yeah, how is this working?
It's good, so I'm excited to see. But like, right?
We're gonna pull up.
And there, then we have to keep I don't know.
And then we have. The comments. Yeah.
Far off. Yep. Like you're never gonna interstate, right? It kind of like.
You're never gonna go through, like, you're never finding.
Well,
that's been built into.
Get it.
Which is like.
Like accidental. I didn't realize.
Even looking for color, and I was I was the one that my PhD was took to development.
Back.
He's back and forth.
Back and forth, off next week, back off, back off. Yeah, this is like.
Okay.
Well, I don't think it's understood. It's a true statement.
So we're looking at how the station. Building around.
Or do you have like a quarter? First part hours of
Oh my gosh. 16 or 15 are really low.
And a half.
That's how.
It was. It was not at all what
Wasn't even like
No, last night. She didn't want to say anything. But I see the situation, the drama. I'm sure. I never would be more certain of anything other than that.
So mad. Hey folks, we have about a minute left, right?
Around that. You could do,
We're the ones.
Yeah, I mean, you're the responsible party.
If you would see, my room is still.
Yeah, no, when,
You know they're already investigating how it works and what the challenges are.
Okay, 30 seconds when you come back together.
yeah, because we couldn't, with our EPA grant, we have two EPA grants, and we don't even have the same staff, we don't have the same product. Because one provides training and one is grant. Someone should have.
Yeah.
David, do you have a card on you? Do you have a card on you? Card? You know, with your name and email on it?
No, you guys go.
I'm curious about this house. Why don't you email them?
Okay, we're gonna come back together. If you haven't already, take a moment to check out what's been said on the boards.
Hey guys, we're gonna go ahead and reconvene. If you could take your seats, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for participating in that activity. Looking in the room, I'm not close enough to see any of the text, but just generally, I can see which boards have posted notes and which have fewer, and I think we have a clear winner over here with inclusive housing has the most number of comments. If you haven't already, before you leave, make sure you have an opportunity to sit down and check out what's been said. We'll take pictures as well and upload those, so if after today you're interested in seeing something that's been said, let us know. So from here, what I'd like to do, now that we've kind of reacquainted ourselves, if we will, with the Richmond 300 chapters, we'd like to break into small groups, and we're gonna dig into one of these chapters in a bit more depth. So for the council members, committee members, council members, what we're gonna do is as follows. I have a handout for each one of the boards that you see that has a few questions that directly relate to Chapter 2 zoning questions. So for instance, the first question on thriving environment says, what are the zoning barriers to renewable energy, wind, solar, or rainwater capture? What I'm gonna ask you to do in just a moment is self-select to the topic that you'd like to discuss in more detail. We're going to be in these groups for 15 to 20 minutes, so you can see that there's about 4 questions for each, and we're going to ask you to elect one person to take notes for us, and you're going to hand this in to us at the end, like a worksheet. something that I know, based on the sticky notes that I see around the room, is a lot of us are interested in housing, that makes sense. What I will also ask is that we try our best, if housing has a ton of people, if there's another chapter that also interests you, to maybe try to divvy ourselves up amongst these chapters. For those of us that are joining online, what I'm gonna do after this meeting is write up all the sticky notes that I see around the room into the spreadsheet. I'm also going to type up all the notes I receive on these worksheets. So you will be able to, after this meeting, add your own thoughts into our shared spreadsheet. What questions do you have?
So since we're self-selecting and housing does seem to be the popular one, is there a limit to how many people you want at each station?
So we were just talking about that. How many on the side? Okay, I would say, let's say no more than 5 people. That's giving quite a bit of leeway. We could still have a topic that's not covered, and that's okay, because we can cover it after the fact in the spreadsheet. But let's say no more than 5 people at a station. So what I'm gonna ask you to do is, when I say go, you're gonna move to the spot in the room that's most closely oriented to the board. So you can see high quality places would be in that corner, diverse economies right here, thriving environment, inclusive housing, and then equitable transportation. And if we need to reorient ourselves, it's fine. But you're gonna move there, and then I'm gonna come and give you your worksheet.
And you're just self-selecting.
You're self-selecting.
And Emily, let me just add one more thing about the worksheet that we give you and the questions that are on it. So these are all effectively kind of adapted from Richmond 300. Richmond 300, under each one of these chapters, it has goals and objectives under those, and then tasks under that. And so we kind of, we went through them and selected ones that seem directly related to zoning, others obviously are not related to zoning. So we just kind of went through and selected some that seemed like they were worth talking about and related to this topic. And took some of those tasks and phrased them into questions. So where there's aspects of what Richmond 300 is saying, but they're still to be determined or to be worked out in detail, that's what we're going to be trying to look at today and try to fill in some of those details and add some guidance specifically as it relates to zoning.
Yeah, great. So when I say go, you're gonna move to the spot in the room that represents the conversation you'd like to have. I'm gonna give you a worksheet, and amongst yourselves, choose who you'd like to take notes for your group. Okay, go. Go ahead. That kind of teacher, wasn't it? I'm sorry.
Where are you
I
at?
usually have to do it myself.
I'm going to high quality places. Yeah.
So go ahead and you, yeah. You are, guys. You're gonna be here for about 20 minutes. If you'll Okay, guys, you're gonna be here for a while, so I recommend taking a seat. Yeah.
Well, they sort of go together, unless Roger's migrating towards us. Places and different.
Can we combine two?
Yeah, we don't, we can
Maybe
combine.
more questions.
Yeah. We don't have to have a group.
Yeah, are you guys doing high quality? Yeah, I want to see.
Oh, all right, well, I'll head over here.
We can do two.
I'll head to transportation. Yeah, or I can go down, or we can go back to the high quality place. You still got like.
There's 2 people at environment, there's 4 there.
There's another.
So I'll come down with Charlie then. All right,
All right, okay, high quality places, there you go, you're gonna be able to put that in.
I can't read that.
Okay, I can write, I'll write.
I type.
Hi, how are you?
All
We're gonna do diverse economies.
All right.
It's okay, I just always want somebody to tell me. This is my friend. All right, what do we do? All right. I'm facilitating.
Creating jobs that are.
300 calls for introducing shelter.
Yeah, so under this vision, these are sort of specific challenges that kind of fall into the plan.
I was just afraid
That's why all the apartments are built on resident housing. Part of the nature of the dog parks. That's okay.
I don't even know if it's in the master. It should not be.
commuter bus, you know.
But like if you're building.
Then it should include the elements that have been adopted as long as we're clear as what they are, because they're not.
The downside is sort of
I know it can only incentivize so much, but like, since Richmond has a law that like affordable, like that can't be
they
Then you should do the whole market.
creating demand
how can not market?
that have to be provided that people aren't being
Okay.
those things.
Let's just allow for
About that, I'm thinking like co-ops, I guess like co-ops are the main thing, there's some other structures of like non-market housing that I look at right now. But I think that's but like collective resistance. I know we have at least one district, but other than that one, I'm not sure. And so, yeah, it just makes me wonder, like, okay, how could that be zoning be implemented or and encouraged?
Yeah, they don't.
And then, like, I think that it's like tax trusts housing land trust that is, just because they don't, like, they don't necessarily have like a lot of flexibility. And they can, so much information oftentimes can become affordable options. That I know, I guess, it was still like relatively, but I'm thinking about that alternative. Since we can't say that a certain percentage of Richmond housing was not just law, which is a whole different.
Well, we're not trying to commit to
Discuss all.
Hey, doing that with us. We appreciate it. I heard a lot of really great conversations happening, so I'm excited to hear what y'all talked about. So what we're gonna do is just really quickly, we'd like to hear from one person from each group, just a really concise, well, key takeaways from your conversation. I was gonna say a summary, but that's 4 questions to summarize. It's quite a bit. Let's start with high quality places and work our way around the room. And again, just a really quick readout of what y'all talked about.
It was myself, Maritza, and Jennifer Mull. Put the notes, so that means I have to talk. Let's see. We talked about how zoning can assist with making, and that could be making sure there's windows or fenestration on the ground floor, but also thinking about having flexibility on setbacks so that there can be like a cafe or a front yard or something to create interest in things that people are looking at. And then I'll talk about one other thing, and that is kind of other housing types or uncommon housing types that would be interesting to see in Richmond. Permanent tiny houses, not mobile ones, co-housing, agri-hoods, more micro units in some parts of the city might be interesting to have. And then a very specific thing of removing square footage minimum on the conversion of non-conforming units. Clearly, the attorneys understand that. So that's our snapshot.
Thank you. What about diversity?
That was myself, and Michelle and Roger. I think things were pretty straightforward, I guess. I guess we were talking about, having diverse housing located near employment centers, job areas, and then also allowing for more kind of flexibility for commercial uses in residential zones. So allowing for using your home for a small business. I know you currently, it's allowed to a certain degree, but kind of intensifying that. And then also, there's this piece about lodging options, which is kind of related to hotels. And so, allowing for more small scale or medium scale kind of temporary lodging in hotels in those residential zones.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thriving environment.
Yeah, we had a group of 2, but a lot of it just kind of addressed the underlying notion that a lot of environmental regulation is covered just under a separate process that's not necessarily zoning pertinent, but instead Water Resources Division pertinent in the Public Utilities Department. However, zoning could still better it as just an option, perhaps in the zoning, you have baked in what to expect when you get to that stage so people can adequately plan for it. A lot of people who are just trying to do even small scale affordable housing get to the permitting stage and then they find out, oh, we need to get this extremely expensive civil engineering concept put together that could kill the entire deal, honestly. So just being more aware about that. And then again, that's not necessarily zoning, but maybe there's a more flexible type of land disturbance or RSMP type of permit that might be just as effective, but not as engineer pertinent from a design cost standpoint. Other than that, there is some gray area about, solar panels maybe in a required setback, making sure that that is not something that would flag for a variance being needed or something like that. Or, going down the rabbit hole, maybe you could make the same argument about a rain barrel, et cetera. I don't want to get too in the weeds there, but overall, just basically a lot of what we talked about was more incentive minded. So other than what's already required, maybe you could reimburse people for installing rain barrels, for instance, or rooftop garden, things like that. That would totally not be zoning pertinent, but just trying to think outside the box a little bit there. Yeah. Did I miss anything?
Well, we just also add the part about being aware of and getting out ahead of potential zoning-related conflicts and challenges on like EV charging and energy storage and other like emerging technology issues. Yeah.
That's right. Off-street parking can be permitted, obviously, but using it in a more commercial capacity creates some zoning complexities. So like my firm had to do a special use permit for somebody because they were leasing parking spaces for electric vehicle charging, and that was like different. So anyway, just again, in the weeds, but making all of the environmental future possible, like within our zoning ordinance to the extent you can would be good.
Thank you. What about inclusive housing?
Sure. So Casey, Benny, and I tackled this one. A lot of interesting dialogue. If I could sort of summarize by topic, based on the prompts that we had, there were three distinct but related concepts. One was those who are experiencing housing crisis and sort of how do we make sure that we have an ordinance that allows those individuals to be addressed without undue regulation being a barrier to additional, whether it's transitional housing, supportive housing, emergency housing, those beds being made available. We did compliment the city that a lot of effort's been done since the Richmond 300 plan to amend the zoning ordinance to help improve that situation. And so we're pleased that to a certain degree PDR sort of already addressed that, but there's probably more that could be evaluated on that front. The second bucket was the diversity of housing as a response to just the overall inclusionary housing policy goal. And so we talked in similar vein to some of the other concepts that have been shared about co-housing, tiny homes, or if the sticks and bricks cost the same to build a project, how do you get creative on allowing less expensive building types to then allow for more inexpensive or more accessible rents? And so we recognize there are certain things that zoning can't do. We can't lower the cost to build a project necessarily, but there are things that zoning can do to increase the cost of a project. And we want to make sure that we're cognizant of sort of where those friction points are. We want to facilitate high quality places, but we can't make it unattainable for people to build projects here that have rents that are inaccessible to portions of our community. The last topic would be sort of senior housing and making sure that we have the ability to age in place in our neighborhoods. We want to make sure that there is, again, flexibility of housing type across the city, that if there are individuals who are in a single family home, they have an option to move into something that's perhaps a little less expensive and easier to maintain, but within the same neighborhood, that they don't have to move to an independent or assisted living facility in a different place where they don't have access to the same community. Through those pretty quickly. Benny or Casey, any highlights that I've missed that you want to supplement?
No, you streamlined it because I'll be rambling, so you don't want to tell me. You'll never get out of here if I start. So.
I'll just speak for myself and say that, like, for me, it's really important that, like, residential housing or that single family housing can be parceled out in the zoning and that's allowed to allow more density in residential areas, because I don't see how we're going to address the various crises that are converging right now if single family homes are left as is, and that's part of the kind of like racist and the design that caused all of this. And so if we're not like undesigning that, I don't think we're gonna get to where we want to get. So yeah, that's a lot.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Last one, equitable transportation.
Right, so it was a group of 4 or 5 of us, and we talked about, our keyword I would say was increasing density. To the last group's point, we talked about everything from how housing, as well as businesses, sidewalks and use of alleys can contribute to equitable transportation, not just in terms of accessibility to public transportation, but also making sure that we're creating connection across the entire region. However, we also did recognize that creating requirements within the zoning does also drive costs. So how can we be mindful of that as well?
Okay, those are all of our boards. Those are all of our chapters and topics. Anything that anyone from the committee? Council, every time, I'm so sorry. Anything that the council wants to double tap on or return to?
I just want to say something about transportation, and it probably has nothing to do with actually the zoning part, but with the bicycles, cycling at nighttime, my vision is not the greatest at night. I've almost hit, I don't know how many people, I don't know what who trains them, like where, because they have the bike lane, and I'm not in the bike lane, I'm in the driving lane. But I see bikes swerve into the driving lane and come back around and just do crazy stuff, and I'm like, they could have gotten hit. Is there any type of way we can implement when we do these different types of transportation, making sure people understand, we want you to be cognitive of, you can still get hit by a car and die on a bike, even though we want you to ride a bike because it's a healthy thing, it's a green thing, great, it's exercise, I love it. I just want to make sure people are driving safely. And the other thing is those scooter things those kids are on, they're just all over the place. It's scary. And the motorcycles, just the motorcycles, mopeds, whatever they are, making all the noise. They just drive any kind of way in between traffic going both directions, traffic going the same direction. They don't care. Yeah. So just, I don't know how we regulate that. This probably has nothing to do with it.
No, you bring up a
I'm
great
just bringing
point,
up
unfortunately.
just for safety.
No, you do. You bring up a great point, but unfortunately zoning can't solve common sense for people knowing how to use a bike lane, but we can put some thought into the design and maybe that's not necessarily the zoning component, maybe it's part of the pattern, but design, making sure that, there's appropriate buffers or we've got the bike lanes.
And they connect to other bike lanes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's a great point, but unfortunately, I don't know that the zoning ordinance can zone common sense, but I hear you.
But I do know when I go to North Side, they have bike lanes and the people seem to know how to ride the bikes over there.
They're just smarter in North Side.
Concerned. I don't want to hit anyone, but.
That's where I live.
You live in North Side.
So I think, bear with me just for a second, Roger, we've reached the end of our time here and a lot of folks want to get to another event. Roger, I'll give you the last closing comment question.
Oh, no, I was just going to see if you're continuing to look into the idea. Zoning now stops at property lines, whether or not there's any way we can, whether there are any changes being brought in state law about whether or not we can extend zoning control beyond the property, at least to the edge of the street line. I don't know whether you're looking.
I don't know in this particular case. I mean, we have done that in other places.
We may not be able to. That was just something I wonder if we're looking at.
I see one of the attorneys shaking their head, so.
Conversation with legal folks, see what they
It's just his conversation. Yeah, we're, anybody else going to the 4:30 or 5:30?
Yeah.
Across the street, yes.
2 blocks over.
Yeah, sir, can someone share what that is so that anyone who wants to speak can go?
Well, you're supposed to, unfortunately, get an invitation, but I don't know whether you, it's called July Urbanism Happy Hour, Zoning Reform in Your Backyard, 212 West 6th Street, Basic City Beer Company. People from.
Were you supposed to register for it?
Yeah. Whether or not they're going to adhere, you're supposed to download. You might still be able to do it.
It was an event, right?
It's a panel discussion that's occurring. It's open, folks across the street. It has been properly noticed, so if more than 2 of us from the council go, we will not be running afoul of any public meeting rules, so don't worry about that. I just want to make a couple quick announcements before we wrap up that our next meeting will be here in this room at 4 p.m. on August 14th. It looks like the city staff is planning some open houses regarding the pattern book on the evening of August 15th and the morning of August 17th, and we'll get more information from staff as those times and dates have been confirmed. And also from our previous meeting, there had been an announcement that there would be a panel discussion tomorrow night around zoning, and that has been postponed because of the panelist availability. And they're looking at maybe rescheduling this for around the September time that this group meets or close to, so that they can tag on to that. So I guess we'll get some more information when that panel has been rescheduled. So we're at the end of the agenda. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. I know that we'll get these presentations online. We'll get some notes from staff. And Emily had said that the community engagement piece, there will be some more information on the website later this week. So
That's right. And before you leave, if you have these, please give me your completed worksheets so that I can type them up. And
If anybody needs some parking validation.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, on that, if we like walk over to this event and come back like
Yeah,
an
you
hour
can
and a
get
half
out
later,
with
it'll,
your,
like, if we leave our car here.
yeah, just leave the car. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. We'll see you next month.
Thank you. Paul.
I know, I'm debating, like,
Well, I just had to-
Alright, have a great trip.
so like. I will.
So fun.
I would also say.
Lots of fun things. I know we're in Marcy.
There is.
During the window that the French decided to like.